All right, all right. How we doing, folks? If you want to learn to produce, you came to the right place. Good to see y'all. Good to see y'all. Hope everybody had a good weekend. Glad to be back making some music with you guys and girls. So, in case you're just joining us for the first time, my name is Matt. I am your teacher here at Music Producer School. Um, I think maybe next stream or the following live stream this week, I will start maybe busting out some things to show you guys and girls that I have done over the years and why I'm in the position I'm in to make you a better producer. So the theme this week that I posted on the class schedule was drums. We did music theory last week, and I wanted to just point out that there's obviously plenty of channels out there teaching how to make maybe specific sounds, like how to get this synthesizer sound or how to get this drum sound or stuff like that. But in my experience, I've done a lot of those tutorials, of course, learning how to make sounds and all that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But my goal here at Music Producer School is when you get into an actual studio situation or when you're actually trying to write music that is going to be put out, and that's the intention, is for this music to be finished, put out into the masses to go to radio or maybe for a movie or a TV show, anything like that. The problem I find over the years is that it's so easy to get sucked into the hole of tutorials and how do I make this sound? How do I make that sound? How do I sound like this person? How do I sound like that person? And it lends itself to a lot of unfinished projects because what tends to happen is you spend all this time working on these sounds, but then when it comes time to actually put it all together and make it a finished thing, that's really difficult to do. And I found in my own career in the beginning, I would come up against these roadblocks. Like I would come up with this amazing, maybe say like EDM. I'd come up with like a drop for an EDM song. Went back in the days when I was DJing a lot, and I would get stuck because I'd do a really great drop, but then I would have trouble writing stuff around the drop. Or else a lot of times actually with myself, I would have an issue where I would write a really super cool epic intro and maybe a verse, but by the time it was getting to the drop, I didn't have the tools to keep going and keep moving forward. So that's my goal here, is to show you how to basically solve problems. That's kind of the main thesis, I guess. So once again, if you're here, be sure to hit share on the stream wherever you are, and drop me a comment in there and say hello. And also, I want to be hearing from you what type of things you'd like for me to cover. What types of problems are you having when you produce? Are you having problems with mixing or mastering? Are you having problems writing chord progressions? Maybe your drums aren't hitting hard enough. Just let me know what you think. Unfortunately, I am only an English speaker. So, Alexander, thank you for the comment. But if you want to have me respond directly to you, you'll have to hit me with some English. Otherwise, send me a message and I'll Google Translate and we can talk that way. But thank you for the comment, Alexander. I appreciate it. And yeah, make sure you guys share the stream. So today the topic for this week actually is going to be drums. And again, I'm not really going to focus, especially this week, so much on a specific drum sound. I want to teach you some of the core things that when you get into the studio with someone, with an artist, or you're working on your own stuff, I want to give you these tools to where it doesn't matter what song you're working on, what genre you're working on, what type of drums you're using. It could be acoustic, electronic, programmed, real drums, whatever. I want to show you, especially today, I want to introduce some principles about the drums that I think are really going to help you. So let's go ahead and get started here. So I'm going to go over to my trusty whiteboard here. Let me go ahead and pull it up. And I wanted to start off with this topic that some of you may have seen before when you're trying to come up with synthesizer sounds. And I noticed this when I was really getting into synthesis, meaning how to create actually your own synthesizer sounds on keyboards and on VSTs and stuff. And it was a concept that I didn't really pay a lot of attention to at first, but then from doing it with synthesizers, I realized how big of a deal it is for drums. And what that is, it's called A.D.S.R. So that's kind of going to be our topic for today before we actually get into actually programming some drums. We might get to a little bit of that today, but I wanted to show you this because especially if you've never seen this before, it's definitely worth exploring so that you understand what it is. So in A.D.S.R, let's do it this way. In A.D.S.R. So what we have here is attack, decay, sustain, and release. So the reason why these are important is because, of course, with drums, get myself out the way here. So, of course, with drums, you're going to be dealing, I think a lot of people already know what attack is. You know, attack is basically, if you think about it, how hard the first part of the sound is going to be. The decay, sustain, and release, I find, is what a lot of people are not too familiar with. So let's see if we can kind of explore this a little bit today, and I'll try and show you a couple real-world examples, and we'll keep it simple for today, and then on the next stream on Thursday, don't forget the next live stream will be Thursday at 2 p.m. Central. So if we have a sound here, and our wave, let's pretend it's a snare drum. Okay, so our snare drum is going to have an attack, meaning when does this top part of the sound right here, when does that sound? How quickly does it sound? So the idea being, if you had a longer attack, it's going to almost like round this sound off a little bit, so it's not going to be as spiky up here, for lack of a better term. The term here is actually transient. So the transient is going to be your peak of this waveform. So if this is a snare drum, your attack is going to be how quickly this peak sounds. So like I said, if you have a very short attack, it means it's going to take a very short amount of time for the peak of this drum to hit, which means it's going to have a nice pop to it. If we have a longer attack, like I said, it's going to kind of round that sound off a little bit right there, and it's not going to be as poppy when you hit it. Now the decay is going to be how quickly when you hit this sound does it decay going this way, meaning it's going to peak up here, and then how quickly does the decay down here happen. The sustain is going to be how long overall does this sound go for. And then your release is, if you hit a drum, you can have a couple different modes. Like in Ableton, for example, you can have it to where as soon as you hit it and you release, the sound goes off. That's cool for certain things. For certain other instruments, say like a piano, where you want it to actually sustain for a while, that release is going to be how long after you let off of the key or your MIDI pad or whatever, how long does the sound go after you let go of that key. So that's kind of the A.D.S.R stuff in a nutshell. And the biggest question that I get when I'm talking about this stuff is, specifically since we're talking about drums today, is why would you ever want to take the attack off? Meaning, why would you want to round that sound off so that the drum, if it's a snare, it doesn't smack quite as hard? Well, let me give you an example, and let's start looking in our DAW here at some stuff. So I'm going to replace, I have this this little simpler here. It's called an Ableton. And we're going to throw it in there. And I'm going to try and just find us a nice little snare sound that we can throw in here and take a look at. Let's see if we can find something a little bit more spiky. That one's kind of cool. Let's see if, yeah, these cymatics are usually pretty cool. Okay, so this is a good one right here. So a lot of people ask, why would you want to take the attack off of a snare drum? Well, the answer to that, typically, because watch what happens when I'm hitting this snare. And then watch what happens as I take the attack time up. So you hear how the attack, the front part of the drum is going away. And now it's back. So people often ask, well, why would you want to do that? And the answer is, especially with drums, since that's the topic this week, if you wanted to, let's say, combine and make your own snare drum. So say you want to do your own custom snare drum. Well, the problem is going to be if you start layering these different snares together, you're going to have two snares hitting at the same time. And you see, this is the second snare that I have down here. And that one's actually, it's a shorter drum overall, and it has a very tight attack here at the beginning. So the problem when you're building your own snare drums, and I wanted to start here because this is something very quickly you can get into yourself. So instead of just always relying on sample packs, you can start making your own drums, which will give you kind of your own signature sound. And this isn't just for like rap beats. This can go for EDM. This can even go for like rock music with acoustic drums. All the principles are the same. So if I wanted to combine these two drums, if I have the attack at the beginning of both of these, they're very hard attacks on both, and I try to combine them, they're going to start kind of competing with each other. So this is an example of where I would actually take some attack away from one of the drums so that we can have the attack from one nice and strong. Because what happens is you're going to get frequencies from both of the drums are going to be kind of basically talking over each other. So you want to eliminate some of those frequencies from one or the other so that we can have a nice, strong, solid attack from one drum. And then we're going to use what's called the tail, which is the part after the initial attack. So this part over here where the decay kind of happens, that's going to be called the tail. So we can actually get rid of some attack here, take the attack from this other drum and combine them, and it's going to sound a little bit better. So let's take some attack out. So that's the one drum by itself. And the other cool thing that a lot of people don't realize is when you get longer drums like this that are pre-made samples, you can almost think of, instead of, I used to find in the beginning when I was producing, I would use reverb on snares a lot. And the problem is reverb, the decays tend to go over everything else in the production. So they kind of muddy things up sometimes. So if you're looking to add a little room sound maybe to your snare, but you don't want to have that reverb tail kind of muddying the rest of your instruments up, what you can do is actually using this technique, you can take a drum that has a longer tail like this, and you can actually get rid of the attack and just use the tail as kind of the body of the snare sound. So that's kind of what I've done here. I'm using the attack of this drum, and then what I can also do is I can even take some sustain away from this. So let's solo this second drum again here. And I'm even going to take away some decay. So you hear how tight that gets now. So I'm just listening to get rid of the body where it's almost kind of like a white noise comes in. So that's just a nice solid attack now. So now I'm going to use the first snare that we took some of the attack away from, and I'm going to use that as the body of the snare. Now these two snares come from the same sample pack, so the sound is a little bit similar. But what happens when you start maybe doing some percussion type stuff? For example, instead of using two of these samples that are pretty close already, what happens if we let's try and see if we can grab a percussion sound here and see what that sounds like when we test it out. And again, I'm looking for something that's going to have a nice kind of long tail when I combine it with the smack of this first drum here, of the one that we're just using the attack on. See, like something like this, like kind of more like a tambourine type hit. I'm going to throw that in there. Let's listen to it. So let me put the attack back in. So you hear it's got that nice pop at the beginning, but again, that may overlap with our other snare drum. So I'm going to, again, take away some attack, and we're going to combine them. See, like right there, I can hear that those frequencies in the beginning are overlapping, and that's going to take away a little power from our snare. So let's take some attack away from this percussion. There we go. So now you have your own custom snare drum just by combining them and not just simply plopping two samples together. We're actually listening for some attack and for that release and decay. And now we have our own custom snare drum just like that. So you're going to have your own samples that you can use. And this is how people, of course, like Skrillex is one of the most famous, are making these very signature sounds. A lot of the old school guys that were producing hip hop and rap back in the day on the MPC or on other type of drum machines, this was a very big part of their process as far as ripping, say, a snare drum from a song, ripping another sound from another song, and then plopping them together, and you're actually using this A.D.S.R technique to combine the sounds. But in other words, you're going to lose power if you just plop two sounds on top of each other. You always want to be thinking, let me go back to my whiteboard here. You always want to be thinking, because if you just plop two sounds together on top of each other. So, for example, let's just think of, again, like two snares. So we have snare number 1. And then we have snare number 2. If we just plop those on top of each other, these frequencies, especially right here, are going to really typically fight with each other. And that's often where you're going to wind up losing a lot of power with your drums. So this is something, when you're combining sounds, you always want to try and be mindful of doing something where you're going to essentially combine the first attack of the first drum, and then instead of a full-on attack like this, again, by using that attack knob, we're going to kind of round the sound off. So he's only really going to kind of come in here. And then when we combine these two together, it's going to give us one nice, fuller sound that's going to be more of a custom, unique sound that'll be your own. And you're not going to, produce a song and have the same exact drum sound, the same exact snare. That is one pet peeve that I have about producing, especially in these days with the internet, is, people get these sample packs, and don't get me wrong, a lot of the samples are great, but it's just you'll hear the same exact drum samples used over and over again. And the only way you're really going to be able to stand out when you're producing your own stuff is to try and create your own sounds. And that's something that took me a while to get into because it does take time. It's not as easy as just plopping a pre-made sample on there, but it does definitely help you stand out. And this is just for snare drums. Kick drums, that's another big one that it took me quite a while to figure out that the way these guys, especially in the EDM world and even in the kick world, were getting these nice, powerful, super punchy kick drums, but they weren't overbearing the whole rest of the song or the production. They were actually using this technique. If you're not aware of this technique, this is something that, again, was kind of... it kind of blew my mind the first time I figured out that people were doing this. So with kick drums, oftentimes you'll get this nice, and again, this is a kick drum is going to look kind of more, because it's so bass heavy, it's going to look more like a sine wave like this. So you have this nice, especially if you're producing hip hop where you're doing 808s and stuff like that, you know, nice low booming drums. I would hear hear these songs on the radio and they're using 808s and they sound awesome. Well, then I would go and I'd be working. I remember a specific artist I was working with where I had this issue where we were working with this 808 kick, and the sample that he brought in for his track, it just wasn't cutting it. It was nice and like low and very bass heavy, but when you'd go listen to it in the car, you couldn't really hear it come through on the car speakers. So what I wound up doing, and then I kind of explored this a little bit more, was this technique of taking a nice long drum like this, where it's a nice boom. But then in order to get that punch, I went and started looking at my sample library, and I would find these nice shorter kicks that were kind of more like that. And then when you combine these together using this attack, this decay, sustain, release method, you start being able to combine these drums in very nice ways where you're going to have a lot of punch, a lot of power, but you're also going to get that nice boom. And the trick is to kind of mix the punch with the boom in the right way. Another thing that's cool about this method is, yes, you could go in and actually edit the waveforms and say, oh, I could just go on my my editor and just chop out a sine wave, chop out, the transient piece, the part with the punch right here. I could just chop that out and crossfade them together. Yes, you can do that. But the cool thing about doing it with this A.D.S.R stuff inside of a sampler, whether you're on FL Studio, you're on Ableton, all of these programs have samplers that allow you to do the attack, decay, sustain, release stuff. What you can do is when you're finished with your song, you're doing a mix, you go out to the car and check it, or maybe you're checking it on your phone, wherever it is, you may be listening and it may be like, oh, okay, yeah, I'm hearing the boom, but I'm not hearing that nice punch cut through the mix. So instead of then having to start all over again and then, like I said, go back into here, into your editor, start chopping up samples, crossfading stuff, moving stuff around, all you have to do is you can go back into your sampler where your drums are, and all you would have to do is just go and adjust these attack and decay settings, and that way you can kind of keep track of what you did when you did it. So let me show you really quickly how I would approach this. If I was making, let's say this is a snare drum example, I would probably do this more with kick drums, but just to not take too much time here. Let's say I use this snare in a song and I realized, oh, you know what? There's just not enough tack or whatever. What I could do is I would save this version as, version, let's say 1.0, and then just right here in my sampler, I can go and change these attack settings on both of my drums, and do whatever I need to do, mess with the decay, whatever, and I'll then be able to save that as a new version. So I'm not destructively, combining waveforms on the editor up here. I'm actually doing it in the sampler, and it just, I find, helps me keep track a lot better what I did, when I did it, because you can see the numbers on the attack, the decay, blah, blah, blah. So that way you can keep track of, oh, okay, well, for this mix version, I had the attack set at, 5 milliseconds, and I'm not getting enough pop, so let me shorten it. Okay, on version 2.0, I'm using 3 milliseconds, and so on. So you can kind of keep track of things a lot easier that way. The other, I guess, main point of this is when you're doing it this way, the other fun thing to do is, let's say you have a controller, like I have my little mini Akai Mini here that I like to use. You can actually program very simply these knobs right here. So what I could do is actually go in, I can quickly get one of my knobs attached to one of these attack decay settings or whatnot, and all I have to do then is, while the song is actually playing, I can just be twisting the knobs, and instead of just kind of poking and clicking, you could actually just be listening, and you could, let's say, hook up the decay to one of your rotary knobs, and then you could hook the attack up to another rotary knob, and while the song is actually playing, you can adjust your attack and decay and your sustain and all that while the song's playing, and you can actually hear the drum in the mix. And I find listening and adjusting while the mix is playing is always typically going to be better, because everything's got to sound good in the mix. The drum itself on its own, it doesn't really matter what it sounds like. It matters what it sounds like in the mix. So that's pretty much the gist of, I think, what I wanted to start with today on drums. Again, it's not super glamorous or sexy, the A.D.S.R thing, but I wanted to start here because I find that a lot of people aren't aware of how this whole thing works with the attack and the decay stuff. And again, this is something that it's not only going to be useful for drums, it's also going to be useful when you're doing synthesizer design, especially for that. Because again, let me show you one more example really quick before I end the lesson for today. If I put in my simple piano, okay, you can hear when I take my hand off of this key, as soon as I take it off, you can hear that the sound stops almost immediately. That's because if you look here, my release is very short. It's not even a half a second. So watch what happens when I bring this up to, let's say, 4 seconds. Watch what happens now. You hear how much longer it is? Now it's really long. So again, it's not just for drums, but what you're going to find is, especially when you get super deep into your production career and you start really trying to hone your skills, and what you're going to find is producers at the top tier, their productions sound very clean and very tight, meaning there's not like these reverb, wash kind of sounds just floating all around all the time. The drums are super tight, they hit really hard, and they're nice and crisp. And what I didn't realize at the beginning of my production career was that a lot of that had to do with, it's not reverb on the snare. What they're actually doing is they're taking the snare sample and they're actually shortening it so that it hits right in that exact time, let's say before the next kick drum hits. Or let's say the kick drum, especially if it's like an 808 and it's a longer sound, you can't have those guys just booming and booming over the whole track. You have to time them so that when the kick hits, by the next beat typically, it's going to be, that decay is going to be done. So you have to mess with these release, decay, attack, sustain settings in order to get your drums super tight. So this is something, again, that you can go into the editor and physically with the waveforms do, but I just find, especially when you start messing with it in the samplers that are in your DAWs, you're going to start getting a better ear for it, because instead of kind of writing and poking around on the waveform, you're going to be able to use these knobs and actually keep better track of what you're doing with your sounds. Plus, it's just more fun to experiment, especially if you have a MIDI controller where you can use the knobs. You can experiment with the length of these drum sounds or synthesizer sounds. This stuff, like I said, it works for a lot of different things. So that's why I wanted to start here. I think on the next live stream, don't forget that's going to be on Thursday at 2 p.m. Central Time. I'm going to go into a little bit more about drum programming, actually putting beats on a grid. I have a super cool thing for that I'd like to show you guys. And also, before I get out of here today, I wanted to also remind you, if you weren't with us last time, go to your browser and go to musicproducer.school, and it will bring you to my homepage here with my shop on here. And I just put out these free inspirational quotes for producers. It is 100% free, and what these are, it's 365 different inspirational quotes with a nice studio background. And what I like to do is I put them on my desktop as my wallpaper, and I have my wallpaper change each day to a new photo and a new inspirational quote. So that way, when you sit down at your computer in your studio, wherever you are to work, you can have kind of a nice little inspirational message to get you going, and a nice cool looking studio to kind of look at. And we all like to daydream about gear and dream about that kind of stuff. So that's a free gift to you guys. I hope that you enjoy it and it inspires you. And then the last thing I wanted to tell you is I did some lessons last week on music theory with chords. If you want to go to the check out the MIDI chord bank, which is essentially a dictionary of almost basically every chord there is in every key. So you can just drag and drop all of these chords into your productions. I'll show you really quick in my DAW here in Ableton. You can see I have it in every key. This is the MIDI chord bank. So up here I have all the keys listed, and you can see each key. I just got a ton of chords that you can just easily drag and drop, put together songs very quickly. And I'm not against using pre-made chord progression packs, but again, it's just like I said with these drum sample things. You don't want to get into a situation where you put out a song, and especially if it gets big, and then people are able to pinpoint like, oh, he got that sound from that sound pack. He didn't even write that. He got that chord progression from that sound pack or that loop pack. Again, I personally don't care. I like sampling stuff. I like using packs. But I do like having essentially a dictionary of chords, so that way I don't have to rely on somebody else's chord progression to get started. I'll start my own simple progression, and then with these chords, I have a lot of what's called extended chords in that pack. So what you can do is, instead of say like a C minor, I have like C minor 6th, C minor 11th, all these cool extended chords that you can add that'll kind of color your productions up and make them sound a lot cooler. So also, if you're joining me today, I have a code if you wanted to grab the MIDI chord bank. I have a code for that, which is Facebook Live. So if you type in the discount code Facebook Live when you're checking out with the MIDI chord bank, that's going to give you a 75% discount on the MIDI chord bank or any of the products on the online store. I don't post this. It's only for you guys and girls who were cool enough to come and check out the live streams that I'm doing. So it's Facebook Live. That'll give you 75% off. I'm about to add some more stuff to the store, but go check out the MIDI chord bank. It's pretty cool. And at the very least, go get you those free inspirational quotes. So I think that's going to be all for today. I want y'all to go and practice with your own drums. I'm going to be back Thursday at 2 p.m. and we're going to start actually doing some beat programming on the grid And then eventually I'll actually be doing some real drums as well on a drum set. And I wanted to kind of, again, go into the philosophy of how some of this stuff works, because it can get super deep. So I didn't want to go too crazy today, but go practice with some of that A.D.S.R stuff. Go combine some of your own drum samples together. Use some of those techniques to try and make your own custom sounds. And I will see you guys again on Thursday. I appreciate it. Y'all have a great day. See you next time.